official podcast of JetNation.com, the largest independent fan site in the NFL. Be sure to check out our forums and talk all things Jets with thousands of other die-hard Jets fans. Now, to get you up to date on all the latest Jets news, notes, and quotes, here's your host, Glenn Naughton.
Good evening, Jets fans. I am Glenn Naughton. This is Jet Nation Radio. I am joined, of course, by my co-host, Alex Varallo. How are you doing tonight, Alex?
Doing well, Glenn, and good evening, Jet Nation.
So, some exciting stuff today. Of course, the introductory press conference. Joe Douglas meets the media. The fans get their first look at their brand new GM. The Jets also re-signed fan favorite running back Bilal Powell to a one-year deal. We'll talk about that a little bit. And we're also going to be joined by Scott Carter. Scott Carter covers the Florida Gators down basically in the old stomping grounds now of Jachai Polite. And we're going to talk to him a little bit about Jachai Polite because, let's face it, he's probably the biggest boom or bust prospect in this Jets draft class because of the fact that he is a guy who played like a first-round pick last year. But as we all know, Combine didn't go well. Pro Day didn't go well. Interviews went poorly at the Combine as well as the on-field stuff. So a guy who was projected to be a mid-first round pick fell all the way to round 3. So did the Jets catch a break, or will the pick end up being a waste? That's something we'll have to wait a couple years to find out, but we'll only have to wait a few minutes to get the thoughts of somebody who watched Jachai Polite up close and personal throughout his career at Florida. So we're looking forward to that. And Alex, let's dive right in to the Joe Douglas introductory press conference. We'll touch on a few key points. I know my thought. I think Chris Johnson in introducing Joe Douglas, I think a lot of fans, myself included, we read into a little bit and try to figure out if he's basically saying that the things Joe Douglas will bring are the things that he feels like the last guy, in this case Mike Maccagnan, was not bringing. And Johnson said about Douglas, he said he's more than a talent evaluator. He's got to be able to build and sustain a winning culture. But he also talked about being a consensus builder, somebody who brings people together. And we did hear, following the Mike Maccagnan firing, that he didn't get along with everyone in the building, or didn't work as well with everyone in the building as Chris Johnson would have liked. So that's something that jumped out at me. And basically, Chris Johnson said, "Look, this is our new guy. I think he can help us, and this was the other big thing to me. And this is, Alex, I wrote something about this the other day, and I don't know your thoughts, but I feel like bringing this guy in, what makes this different, and I know it always feels different when you're bringing a new GM. It always feels new and exciting, and it's going to be better than the last guy. But if you look at the last couple GMs the Jets have hired, the last few really, I mean, let's face it, Mike Tannenbaum was a cap guy who impressed Bill Parcells, and that's why he got the job. John Idzik was a cap guy who was recommended by Korn Ferry and got the job. Mike Maccagnan, a longtime scout who, you didn't hear his name as a guy a lot of teams or any other teams were interested in, and a lot of high-profile guys turned down the interview with the Jets the last time around. So Mike Maccagnan got the job. The difference this time, the biggest thing to me, is Joe Douglas is a guy, I mean, the resume speaks for itself. 15 years in Baltimore, a year in Chicago, and then he goes to Philly and helps them build a Super Bowl winner with Howie Roseman. So Joe Douglas is a guy who was in demand. There were, I mean, I'm sure you saw it, Alex, when the Houston Texans fired their GM the other night. People thought they were going to make a quick run at Joe Douglas because they were interested in him last year. So I guess what I'm saying here, the biggest thing, is that rather than the Jets getting the guy that they thought was the best of a bunch of guys that weren't really in demand, this time around, because the franchise quarterback is in place, The Jets interviewed some highly qualified candidates, and they got the guy who some people felt from day one was the best. So, I mean, do you think that's a fair assessment to say that this is a guy who, rather than getting, as I said, sort of the best of a bad bunch, they now get a guy who was coveted by other teams and who many people felt would be hired as a GM next year?
Yes, I absolutely agree on all points. And you have to just be, I guess, watching what has come over the last few weeks and all the scrutiny and the criticism that the Johnsons have gotten. And it kind of seems like they've come through this whole transition looking a little bit smarter than we thought, getting the guy that they coveted, somebody that's spoken very highly of, that, as you mentioned. And we've talked about Ozzie Newsome in the past. He's pretty much, a football legend. And, experience matters in this league, and winning matters in this league, and pedigree. And these are all the things that I hear about with Joe Douglas. I can't sit here and say that he's going to right all the wrongs. I'm sure this guy's going to make some mistakes throughout, the next few years, but he's definitely shown a large sample size of good things that you can work with. And, again, I haven't heard one bad thing that has been mentioned about him at all. And it really seems like, air quoting, the Jets got their guy. And as odd as it may seem with the timing of how the front office has handled things, it does seem like they've come out with their heads high in this situation here. And they're really putting together an all-star staff, offensively, defensively, and now in the front office. So I'm excited and I'm happy for what they did. And I just kind of hope that he's able to take what we have now and bring it to the next level, because that's what this is all really about, is being competitive and being in the conversation in late December about postseason football. So I'm overall thumbs up on, double thumbs up for me on this whole situation.
Yeah, and I think, as I said, one of the more interesting things that Chris Johnson said was the fact that he views Douglas as somebody who will be able to attract other talented people. And that kind of ties in. That was kind of the part of the reason I was making the point that I was making. When you bring in a John Idzik and a Mike McCagnon, these sort of lower level, or I shouldn't say just guys who weren't high on anyone's list as an executive, they're not going to have a bunch of strong names below them that are willing to come in and work for them. And that's not the case with Douglas. Douglas has done enough that he's done enough networking. At least that's the expectation. That's what's being reported, that he knows that he wants to bring a couple of guys with him from Philly who are loyal to him and who have done a good job there. So I think the staff he's going to be able to assemble. There's been talk about Todd McShay. Whether or not that happens, we'll see. They were, friends from college or whatever. But Joe Douglas is here. He's saying all the right things. I'm blessed and honored to be here. Our vision is aligned. He took the time to thank a lot of people that worked with him throughout the years, from high school coaches and things like that. Family, the kind of the standard stuff you expect. But, he says he wants to be a steward and lead this franchise. And he feels that his time together in Chicago with Adam Gase, and I think Adam Gase said they get along well because basically Douglas can tolerate his insanity. But these are guys who formed a bond in Chicago. Yeah, someone has to, right? And I think that, I try not to get too excited because, as we talked a little bit before we came on the air. We hear this with every new guy, every new GM. They say the right things. No GM walks in the door and says, well, we're going to draft a bunch of morons and hope for the best. Of course they're going to come in and say, we're going to draft passionate players and smart players and players that want to win more than anything in the world and blah, blah, blah. Of course. These are all things we know. So it's about the results. The unfortunate thing here is that we won't know because Douglas isn't going to have a draft until, next season. But there are players that can be brought in, other methods. He did mention that. He talked about, the Jets having third priority on the waiver wire, and they'll be keeping an eye on that, which you would expect. But as a guy, with that resume, I don't know, as a Jets fan, how you can't be excited. And I wanted to ask you, get your thoughts. A move that was made just a couple days ago. Speaking of transactions and general managers, Bilal Powell comes back on a 1-year deal. A fan favorite, a guy who, I looked at some of his numbers the other day. Other than his rookie season where he had 13 carries or 18 carries, something like that, Bilal Powell has never averaged less than 4 yards a carry. And playing behind that terrible offensive line last year, well, I should say, I said that terrible run-blocking offensive line last year, he still averaged 4 yards a carry. So what are your thoughts on having Bilal Powell? Maybe in 4.3. I'm going to look into that. But what are your thoughts on Bilal Powell coming back and at least getting a shot to try to make this roster again?
I think one could look at this lineup, or this group rather, and there is strength at all different levels as far as youth is concerned, speed is concerned, versatility, being able to mask coverages or packages and keeping the defense on their toes, not knowing exactly what, who you're going to cue in on. You could literally run a 5-receiver set just with our running backs and still have the threat of the run game, and they're still all great receivers. So I really like how this backfield is shaken out. I'm definitely going to be a homer here and say I think this is one of the best running back fields put together in the league. Definitely in the AFC East as far as depth is concerned. And I really like the fact that we are putting a little bit of a focus in on the run game, because that shows me that Adam Gase and his people that he's put together want to protect Sam Darnold every way that they can by giving him a strong running game and giving him an edge on play action and rollouts and designing plays where you can get Sam out in space and expose the defense. So I really like the move. I'm not sure what the money is yet. I'm sure, it's not going to be something ridiculous as it's just a 1-year deal. So this is great. This is great news for our team. People may be thinking like, we don't want to take away carries for Bell. I'm fine with it. The way I see this is that we can still get the best out of Bell and keep his legs fresh, not only throughout the course of the season, but down the line as well.
Yeah, I think, listen, Le'Veon Bell's not going to carry the ball 600 times. You're right. You got to give him a breather. And Bilal Powell is kind of like a poor man's Le'Veon Bell. I mean, granted, a very poor man's Le'Veon Bell. But the way he can do everything, he can block, catch, run. As a matter of fact, I just looked. Bilal Powell he's never averaged less than 4 yards a carry. That was years 2 and 3. Since his 4th season, he's averaged 4.3, 4.5, 5.5, 4.3, 4.3. And you look at how bad that O-line was last year. Bilal Powell just has this great ability to find a way to find a crease where there isn't one and pick up some yards. And you mentioned the depth at running back now. And I know that for me personally, a few people on Twitter were saying, why are you happy to see Bilal back? He's going to take carries away, or he's going to take a roster spot from a young kid. And I kind of feel like, you know what? If Bilal Powell comes in, plays well, if he's healthy, stick Trenton Cannon on IR, stash him on IR for something, stub toe, out for the year, and then you let Bell and Powell be the backups and Montgomery, on occasion. But Montgomery's going to be a receiver / running back. So I would love, and as you mentioned, and we've talked about it several times this offseason, the depth, or not even the depth, but the versatility. How these backs, and you just said it. So many different guys you can send them to run a route, and you're not losing anything. You have guys who can catch the ball, who can block, who can do everything. And you add Bilal Powell to that mix, and that's another guy who can do it all. And I tweeted the other day, and I was watching Week 17 again from last year, just to specifically focus on Deontay Burnett and Derek Jones. And the thing that jumped out to me, the numbers, Eli McGuire didn't have a huge day. He averaged I think he was under 3 yards a carry, but he was fairly consistently getting gang tackled in the backfield. So it certainly wasn't a matter of Eli McGuire not doing his job as much as it was the O-line not doing theirs. But when the O-line did do their job, I kind of, I've spoken highly of McGuire from the time he was drafted. But watching that game the other day and seeing what he was able to do when there was, when you gave him a little bit of room to work with, I kind of came away as a reminder, this guy, I really think this guy could be a good player. Not saying he's going to go winning rushing titles or whatever, but I think he can be a quality player. And he's, when he was drafted, I said, they just drafted Bilal Powell's replacement. So to have them both on the roster again, I have no issue with it. And nobody's made the roster yet. As much as I like Eli McGuire, I wouldn't say he's a lock because of the fact that you've got Powell now. I would say he would be, if I had to bet who would make the roster, I would make McGuire the favorite just based on Powell's age. But to me, the perfect scenario is Powell makes it, McGuire makes it, Cannon goes on IR. But I say that even realizing, though, that I think Brent Boyer is going to want him on his roster to work with because he did a phenomenal job last season on special teams. And when you look at these guys that are trying to make this roster, Alex, do you think that can be an issue if you're the Jets and Trenton Cannon comes in and does a phenomenal job as a punt returner? That really puts you in a tough spot. I mean, how do you prioritize if you're looking at your third running back and it's between Bilal Powell and Trenton Cannon's doing a great job as a return man? Does that squeeze Bilal Powell off the roster?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And, as we go through the summer process and guys are going to get hurt and, things are going to change. So that makes a very, very tough cut because you don't want to just let a guy like Powell walk because we've seen what he can do before. We do know that it's a sensitive situation because he's coming back from a neck injury, and we know that we've been down that road with Quincy Enunwa and those questions when he came back. So, the way that I see it, the guy that makes room for these guys is the fact that the Jets at this moment, in my mind, don't have a true number 4 wide receiver. And I think that that's where guys like Le'Veon Bell and Ty Montgomery are going to come into play. And they're going to be able to keep more running backs because you have the ability to move one of those guys out as a wide receiver. And if it came down to it, it's all based on, who's going to be getting more snaps, who's going to be more of a producer on the team overall. Is Trenton Cannon's speed as a gunner and as a returner that valuable? I remember going through the 53 in years past and wondering, how does Sharon Peake keep making this lineup? This guy is not involved in the offense. He's not getting receptions. He's not getting looks. But yet his special teams play apparently was so impressive that he's been able to stick on this roster. And I wonder if that's going to be the same kind of scenario with Cannon, where is it the other things that he does well is going to help him stick? Now, I'd personally like to keep them all, and I realize that it's a little far-fetched to have 5, possibly 6 running backs. But when you're looking at a high-profile player like Le'Veon Bell, and like you said, we don't want to have him be burnt out year one. So you want to have a healthy rotation. And I'd be much more comfortable letting one of the wide receivers go and keeping an extra running back just because of how versatile these guys are in the receiving game. So I don't think that you brought in Powell if you didn't think that he has the opportunity to do something for this team this year. He's only on a 1-year deal, because what's the point of bringing him in, right? You're bringing him in maybe to see how healthy it is, maybe how well is he going to do with contact, once the pads come on. So there's a lot of questions that have to be answered down the line. But at the moment, I think you got to find a way to keep this core and this group of running backs on the roster. And if you have to let, a guy like Pete go, or if you have to part ways with, well, I don't think Josh Bellamy would be a guy that, because I think he's really tied to Gase right now at the moment, and he seems to be a vocal leader according to Emory Hunt's interview that he gave us a couple weeks ago. So I'd be much willing to have less wide receivers going into the year, knowing that we could just take a guy like 88 or 26 and just throw him into the mix.
Yeah, I think Jerome Peak is toast, and I liked Peak, good special teamer. Really hoped that sort of that pedigree coming out of a school that just consistently produces wide receivers, that size, that height speed combo. I hoped he would develop into something, but that just hasn't happened. Or do you kind of chalk that up to as we've said it a lot of times this offseason, the inability of the previous coaching staff to develop players. But in all honesty, I think he's gone. And I think, speaking of guys who are gone, another move today that popped up a little while ago, the Jets parted ways with tight end Chris Herndon. Now, the reason why this is interesting, correction. Chris Herndon is going to be benched out for a couple weeks. They parted ways.
Ooh.
I don't want to give anybody a heart attack there.
JetNation a heart attack there.
Exactly. I apologize. They parted ways with Neal Sterling. I'm sitting here staring at the tight end depth chart while I'm saying this. Chris Herndon will be suspended. Neal Sterling was released, and that means they basically the two sort of, I would have thought that the next two guys in the pecking order behind Herndon to be receiving tight ends in Sterling and Jordan Leggett, they've now both been let go. So if Herndon is suspended for a couple weeks, which again for the DUI he had last year, that leaves you without that sort of athletic receiving threat who can stretch the field a little bit. Of course you have Wesco, you have Tomlinson, you have Brown, who kind of becomes the really interesting guy in this scenario, who came over from Chicago and didn't really do a whole lot with the Bears as a receiver, but he was a receiver in college. He was converted to tight end, and Adam Gase obviously is familiar with him and wanted him brought in, so the Jets brought him in. So, of course, listen, we're in June. They could bring in 5 other tight ends between now and the start of, training camp. But for where the roster is right now, Daniel Brown, James Madison product, is a guy who hasn't done a whole lot as a receiver in the pros. But what do you think the Jets are thinking here, Alex, by letting go of another receiving tight end? That's 2 in a couple weeks. And again, if Herndon is out, that leaves you with Brown, Tomlinson, and Wesco.
Yeah, I would have thought that they would have shaken up that backfield a little bit later in the process. Kind of interesting to see how Gase is already picking and choosing the guys that he wants to move forward with. So we got 3 really good blocking tight ends at the moment, and we know that one of them, and Herndon, can be a good receiver. Wesco is an unknown because he's a rookie. Everything that we hear about is his blocking ability and how he can be moved around from fullback, H-back, and inline tight end. So I guess it's unfamiliar territory that we're going to be tapping into. Now, we've seen what Eric Tomlinson can do, which is not a whole lot. We know that he will be active on special teams. He will be incorporated in multiple tight end sets for pass protection and run blocking. And it's just interesting to see how there isn't really any other guys that can run in the open field as Neal Sterling can. Now, I'm only saying this from attending training camp over the last couple of years and then just seeing, a small sample size of what Sterling did in preseason. And for whatever reason, this guy just has not been able to get his career going. So hopefully he lands somewhere good, where, he can maximize his potential. At the moment, it's quite interesting to see how this is going to shake out because, like I said before, Gase is picking his soldiers that he wants to go into battle with, and he's like we know, he's an aggressive coach, and he's confident in himself and his system. So clearly what we have in-house right now, he's comfortable with. And whatever Daniel Brown has done clearly is good enough in Gase's mind to where he's letting go of a couple players that we as fans have come to know and become familiar with and become comfortable with. So it'll be interesting to see if these moves work out for the best.
Yeah, and that's a name, Daniel Brown, it's interesting. That was a name that I saw quite a bit, popped up on Twitter. I heard his name mentioned on the Jets official site, saying that he was a guy who impressed and made some plays. And again, it's, this time of year, everything is taken with a grain of salt. But as I've said before, these guys who kind of break out and surprise people, they have to start somewhere. So it's, encouraging to hear that Brown has been impressive so far. Before I go any further, though, Alex, we're going to take a second here to thank our sponsor, who, of course, is Miles Social. So JetNation Radio would like to thank Miles Social. Miles Social, they help with your business with social media, websites, and SEOs. Check them out at milesocial.com. That's MILE social.com. So basically, if you're running a business and you got too much on your plate, you need somebody to run the part of your business that takes care of your advertising and helps you to bring more customers in through the doors, put more money in your pockets. That's who you want to contact, Miles Social. Check them out, milesocial.com. So that covers that. So one other thing, and this is one of those things, Alex, I'm the first one to admit it. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. It's not gonna get the Jets any better football players through the draft or free agency or undrafted free agency or trade. It will register a zero in reality, in the reality of building a football team. But I got to tell you, as I watched that Joe Douglas press conference today, I kind of thought to myself, I like that guy looks like a badass. I do, because this is the NFL. And no, I know he's not going to put the pads on and go out there and kick anybody's ass. I get that. But there's just something about, because it's been a while. I mean, who was the last guy that ran this team that you looked at and went, that dude is a badass? Listen, I like Mike McCagnon, but a badass, he was not. John Idzik, I thought he was going to faint during his press conference. That was the most fragile, timid, tepid executive I've ever seen in the public eye. Mike Tannenbaum, nice enough guy. Love to sit down and have a sandwich with him. But come on, like none of these guys. And that was a weird thing today. This presser started, and he just starts talking, and I think the Jets GM could kick any other GM's ass. Like, look at this guy. He's a beast. And I know it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but when in a physical game like football, it's just something that just makes you feel good, which, as I said, I know doesn't amount to anything on game day or on draft day or on any other day. But I just thought, that's nice. They got a guy who might walk in a room and command respect, which, again, that's something that's been lacking among other things. And I'm not, I'm not turning on Mike McCagnon here and dumping all over the guy because he's gone now because I did support him. And like I said, and I thought that was funny, Alex. You know what someone said to me the other day? Because I feel like you and I were pretty fair to Mike McCagnon. And someone said to me the other day, after going on about how they were glad the Jets moved on from Mike McCagnon, they said, I'm glad we got a GM in here because this team is almost ready to compete for a Super Bowl. And I thought, then why is it good that you just fired the guy that built it? Like you literally just said, thank God we got rid of that dude who built us a team that's ready to compete for a Super Bowl in a year or two, which seems very contradictory to me. I would think if you tore down your roster and 3 years later you were getting ready to start a season with a team that you felt was championship caliber in a year or two, you wouldn't be saying, thank goodness we got rid of that guy. But, They did, and that's fine. To each his own. But yeah, what do you? Am I crazy to think that? Am I crazy to think, I'm glad the Jets have a GM who might walk into a room and immediately get attention. I see people online comparing him to the Mountain from Game of Thrones and WWE wrestlers. But do you get that same feel, Alex?
Yeah, I've seen all the pictures and the stuff that you've been talking about. Quite comical. How apparently, the WWE or F or whatever their logo is, how you see those things surface out to explain this guy. And it was actually mentioned in his interview today. I was on my way home. He was on the Michael Kay show, and I forgot who it was. It was probably the guy Peter that asked him and said, "You look like if you were to take on, all the other GMs in the league, you would definitely kick all their butts." So it was kind of funny how they mentioned. Oh yeah, they said the same thing, which is great. I'm glad that you mentioned that. And his response was, "I'm a lover, not a fighter, and they don't pay me to do that," or something like that. So
right.
I agree. I get the same kind of feel, especially knowing that, he has over 15 years of experience working in one place, and then he went over in Baltimore, and then he went over to Chicago, and he made a good relationship with Gase, and it kind of seems like everywhere that he's gone, he's left his mark, which has been a good one, and his track line definitely validates where he's gotten to today. So it's good to have a good football mind. Like I said, the front office and this team right now, it's looking way much better than we were a year ago. And it's not the scenario where I've been looking at this whole thing like, okay, we brought in Todd Bowles, who never had head coaching experience before in the NFL, so that was a gamble. We brought in Chan Gailey, who has experience but stepped away from the sport and was a little bit long in the tooth, and clearly just didn't have the stability to go through the NFL rigors of being an offensive coordinator, and basically was ready to walk after a second season. And you brought in John Morton, who was a wide receiver coach that had never had a lot of experience calling plays as an offensive coordinator. Same scenario with Jeremy Bates. So all these kind of unprovens, unknowns, now we're working with Gase, who has shown that he can take very little, which what he had in Miami, and make a playoff run. We've seen what he's done with other quarterbacks in the past due to the experience of players or coaches that he's worked with, like Mariucci and Martz. And now we've got this GM that credits everything that he does to Ozzie Newsome. And again, we've spoken greatly about, his stamp that he's put on this league. So it's a comfortable feeling to know that you have football guys with the right mentality in place that are going to be making football decisions. So that's comfort for me, like that warm weighted blanket coming over after all these weeks of just kind of not knowing what direction we were going to go into. So I'm excited and I'm happy that we finally figured out something that puts us back on the right track.
Yeah, and just a quick note that is not Jets related, but very interesting. I don't know if you saw this pop up. Adam Schefter reporting that the Oakland Raiders are going to be the choice for Hard Knocks. And I'll tell you what, Gruden and AB, and that's going to be. They've added some questionable characters. Incognito. I think Incognito sealed the deal. I think once they signed Richie Incognito, they were like, "There's no way we're not featuring this team on Hard Knocks."
Absolutely. And
so
I'm just wondering, does that come with the bleached mustache?
I'm telling you, that is going to be some must-see TV. Very excited about that. Even as Hard Knocks, also, it doesn't matter which team you like. Yeah, and I think
I don't know if people remember that, but
oh yeah, and I don't know if you saw last week. I think it was last week. Jay Gruden. I guess the Redskins were a possibility for it, and they asked Jay Gruden about it, and he was like, "I think John's team would be a lot more interesting." And he was a big advocate of Hard Knocks not coming to them. And Jay Gruden, by the way, little fun fact here. Have you ever attended an arena football game, Alex?
No, I have not. Maybe that's something I should put on my bucket list.
I went to an arena football game one time many, many years ago. I just remember it was the Tampa Bay Storm. I don't even remember who they were playing. And I had the opportunity to witness firsthand some Arena League football history as on that day, Jay Gruden became the Arena Football League's all-time passing leader. And it wasn't until many years later when I heard that name again, and I was like, is that guy from the Arena League? And sure enough, it was. So there you go. But the Arena League, I think their passing records got broken like every other week. So not that big a deal. But we're still waiting here. We're expecting to be joined by Scott Carter, who covers the Florida Gators down south, and he is not with us at the moment. So we have a message out to him, waiting to hear back. But while we wait, Alex, one thing that we had discussed last week that I was hoping to get to this week, was the New York Jets 2017 draft class. Reason being, as we always say, teams, some people lose their minds. The second a guy is drafted, the second a guy makes a mistake, he's a bust, he sucks, get him out of the league, cut him, why did we draft him? That's a bunch of baloney. I think most logical people have sort of settled on the idea of giving a player 3 years to show whether or not he belongs in the league. And so with that being the case, the 2017 class, they played in 17 and 18, so they are about to enter year 3. And there aren't a lot of names remaining on that list. But let's go ahead and take a look at the 2017 class, talk about the hits, the misses, and the question marks. So obviously, I'll recap it real quick for you, Alex, because there might be some names on there that you've already forgotten, because even though they were only drafted a couple years ago, they are long gone. Of course, Jamal Adams with the 6th overall pick in round 1. Marcus May, round 2 with the 39th overall pick. Ardarius Stewart, round 3 with the 79th overall pick. Chad Hansen, round 4 with pick 141. Jordan Leggett, round 5, pick 150. Dylan Donahue, pick 181, another 5th rounder. And then the final 3 picks, all in the 6th round, Eli McGuire, Jeremy Clark, and Derek Jones at picks 188, 197, and 204, respectively. So, Alex, your thoughts. Let's go round by round. I think the first round is fairly obvious. Jamal Adams. There are those who are critical of this pick because of the fact the Jets didn't take a quarterback. There are still people who criticize this pick because they didn't get Patrick Mahomes. But looking back at where the Jets ended up now, and especially with the Deshaun Watson one, because a lot of people criticize not taking Deshaun Watson in that spot, and some people still do. And to me, I think, would I rather have Deshaun Watson or would I rather have Jamal Adams and Sam Darnold? I would rather have Adams and Darnold than Deshaun Watson. But your thoughts on the pick and basically, are people justified in still being? I mean, people get mad at Jamal Adams because he got drafted like he made a mistake. But consider all things considered, draft slot, who they passed on, what they could have. How do you feel about that pick as these guys get ready to enter year 3?
Yeah, you'll have to ask my buddies on opening night, because they were very confused with my elation when they picked Jamal Adams. I was jumping, I was screaming and shouting, and I remember, people saying, "Oh, maybe we should go for that tight end out of Alabama, O.J. Howard, or maybe we should go for Malik Hooker, the rangy safety out of Ohio." And both players are good players, they're good prospects, and they still have some time to make a name for themselves. But I don't think anyone has grown to the level that Jamal Adams has gotten himself to out of that entire class. I saw him tweet the other day, and I think he was commenting on PFF's ratings on top safeties in the league, and he was in the top 2, and his tweet, I believe, was top 2, not 2. And I love that. And just from hearing on comments that he's made throughout this offseason, he wants to bring it up to another level, which I can't imagine what that's going to be. So I love the fact that we finally got somebody that is going to keep the locker room accountable. He's going to bring the energy every day. I really love the fact that he's an intense player, that you can move around in so many different positions and he can do so many different things. I think a player like Jamal Adams gives a comfortable feeling to defensive coordinators knowing that, how am I going to draw up this package? What personnel am I going to use to make sure that, we don't get exposed? Jamal Adams is your answer. You can just move him around. He's like the queen in chess, that he can go any which direction and be successful and keep you honest when you're out there on the field, drawing up really, really high blitz packages and knowing that you have guys like him on the field that you don't have to be concerned about as a liability. So I'm definitely a huge fan of that pick. And if we had to go back and do it again, it would be Jamal Adams 100 times out of 100.
And I think what makes it so interesting, and I hate kind of, repeating the same thing that so many others are saying, but it's one of those things that it's so blatantly obvious, but it's still something I'm really looking forward to, and that is the way Greg Williams uses this guy. He really can do everything. I said it last year. I hope we see it this year. I want to see him rushing the passer a lot more, because I think when he comes off the edge, he looks like an elite edge rusher to me. And I think if Jachai Polite pans out and you can have him coming off one edge and Jamal Adams off the other, and Quinnen Williams and Leonard Williams coming up the middle, the quarterbacks aren't going to have a lot of time to get rid of the football. So I love the pick. I understand the frustration. I understand people that were upset they didn't get the quarterback. But when you do get the quarterback in the next year's draft, then why the hell are you still mad about it? Like, you're still people upset that the Jets didn't get Deshaun Watson, who, for my money, the guy holds on to the ball way too. Like, if I had to rank those 3 quarterbacks, it would be Mahomes, Darnold, Watson. So the Jets ended up with a better quarterback than a lot of people wanted, and a lot of people were mad about picking Jamal Adams over. And now you have Adams and a better quarterback. So I don't understand the anger and all that, but some people are just, we've talked about it. Some people just live to be miserable. But then, of course, in round 2, the Jets went safety again, which even I criticized on draft night. I hated that. I felt like there were so many other needs on this team. I felt like the thing that made me angriest about this particular draft was that the Jets didn't grab a corner early on, because it was such a deep corner draft.
Yep.
But you go with Marcus May in round 2. In the moment, I was pissed off. But then, the more I thought about it, because, the funny thing is, we always hear people talk about how the league has changed so much and it's evolved, and now tight ends are these huge targets in the middle of the field. And if you don't have a tight end, and that was kind of the hypocrisy that I was hearing from a lot of fans. I would have somebody say to me, the Jets are still stuck in the dark ages. We don't even have a receiving tight end, and that's where the game is heading. And then it's like, okay, fair enough, good point. And then the Jets draft 2 guys to be able to stop tight ends, and they're like, oh my God, this isn't the 1980s. You don't draft safeties high. I'm like, how you can't have it both ways. You can't sit there and say this team is stupid because they won't draft a tight end, but then they're stupid because they drafted guys who can cover tight ends. You know what I mean? So that did make a lot of sense.
And then they want to blame the defensive coordinator for not drawing up the right scheme or game plan, because we're seeing the back of our defensive backs' jerseys all the time, and guys are running for 40, 50-yard plays. So
yeah, and now you brought in a couple safeties to You brought in some safeties to stop the bleeding, but now, of course, Marcus May plays 16 games as a rookie and then plays only 6 games in year 2. So how would you evaluate that pick now, knowing there have been some health issues? He's a little older than you would like for a third-year guy. He was drafted older. But how do you feel about that pick now, and what would you do if you had that pick to make over again?
Yeah, I remember that draft and thinking how dynamic this team would be if they could get Dalvin Cook, because I expected Dalvin Cook to go in the first round, and he just happened to slide that day. And not knowing that he was going to get injured, people say, oh, thank God we didn't make that pick. But I think it's too early to tell on any of those guys. But to stay on May, I think he is one of the most important players in this defense, because if Greg Williams wants to be aggressive, as we've heard about his game plan, you're going to need that deep coverage. You're going to have one guy that you can really trust, that's going to be able to play sideline to sideline and mask the deficiencies that we may have at corner. If Tremaine Johnson doesn't have a bounce back year, that makes May even more important. If Darryl Roberts does not show that he can withhold his own at the number 2 spot, again, you're going to need a guy like May to make sure that teams aren't picking on him, every second and long or third down situation. So May is going to be a key factor on how everyone else is going to be able to do what they do. Now we know that they like to draw up these, what do they call them? Cover zero situations where it looks like everyone's up at the line of scrimmage, and then a few guys drop back, and maybe 6 or 7 guys go after the quarterback. So when you're running a defense like that, you better have athletic guys that have good speed and are, good at the mental game and know where they're supposed to be and can recognize and react quickly. And I think that May is one of those instinctual players that he uses his mental skills, and it's good that he's got the good physical skills. But again, with his play style, we hope that he can remain on the field for 16 games. So I like May a lot. I wish that, he wasn't as talked about as much as being a player that finds himself on the injury list as often as he does. So hopefully, this is the year where he's able to get out there all 16, like I had said.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the big thing for him is the health. And I think for me, as I said, I probably would have taken a corner in that spot. I think I probably, if I was the Jets in that draft, rounds 2 and 3 would have been corners. There were just too many good ones to pass up, and so to not take one until round 6 was really disappointing for me personally. And as much as I said, I liked Maccagnan, but I said after that draft, I wrote an article after that draft saying, is this going to be Mike Maccagnan's version of John Idzik's draft, where it was so deep at receiver, and he took 3 of them, and 2 of them, one of them was off the team in a couple months, the other one was put on IR and off the team the next year, and Shaq Evans, and then of course Quincy Enunwa, who didn't really blossom for a few years. I don't know if you remember this stat, Alex. But I mean, if Vegas had even offered odds on such a thing, they probably wouldn't have, because it would have had to have been like 10,000 to 1. But I don't know if you remember this statistic from that year when the Jets took Jalen Saunders and Shaq Evans and Quincy Enunwa, 3 receivers taken in what was arguably the deepest receiver draft in decades. For every receiver that was drafted that year, they were the only 3 guys who didn't have a single catch. Like that's unfathomable. Like 20 some guys get drafted, every single one of them has a catch except for 3 guys, and all 3 of them are on the same team. Like you couldn't calculate odds. Well, I'm sure you could, but I couldn't. But yeah, I mean, so that's the way I looked at this draft with Maccagnan. I thought all the corners in this draft, and you wait till round 6 to take a couple of them, and you drafted back-to-back receivers. And we'll get the next 4 picks will not take very long to cover, Alex. So we both like the Adams pick. We both like the May pick. I would have preferred a corner in that spot. Round 3, Ardarius Stewart, gone. Chad Hansen, gone. And for those of you who didn't see, that popped up a few minutes ago. Chad Hansen back in the league, signs with the New Orleans Saints as a free agent. So he gets a shot to catch some passes from Drew Brees. We'll see how that works out. And I really thought, like, of the two of them, I thought one of them would have panned out. To see both of them get cut so quickly was like, geez, no, I totally didn't expect that. Then, of course, there was Jordan Leggett, who we talked about earlier. He went in round 5 out of Clemson, had 14 catches for 114 yards and a touchdown last year. Gone, let go by Adam Gase a couple weeks ago. Dylan Donahue to me had Kevin Green written all over him, Alex. I heard Manish made us say, I can't remember if Manish said it this offseason or at some point last year, that the Ardarius Stewart pick was basically, it was John Morton. So it would have been, Morton was the OC. And Manish claimed that it was John Morton banging the table for Ardarius Stewart, saying, I can make this guy a player. And so the Jets granted him that wish, and then he didn't use the guy. Ardarius Stewart, 6 catches as a rookie, 6 receptions. He had more rushing attempts than he had catches. 7 rushing attempts and 6 catches. Unbelievable. Then you go Chad Hansen, who I mentioned. Jordan Leggett didn't last. He was gone. Dylan Donahue, that's what got me thinking about the Ardarius Stewart thing. When I was at training camp, and many writers commented on it, that guy was inseparable from Kevin Green. I mean, you had to think, undersized, underrated, hair on fire, long blonde hair hanging out of the back of his helmet. I think Kevin Green looked at Dylan Donahue and went, that's me. Get me that guy, because that guy is me, and I will make him into me. And more DUIs than career sacks, and he was gone. And that brings us to the only 3 still remaining in that class outside the top 2 picks. That, of course, being running back Elijah McGuire, cornerback/safety Jeremy Clark, and cornerback Derek Jones. What has to happen, Alex, to prevent this draft class? I mean, listen, if Jamal Adams is an all-pro, which he's already been an alternate, one of my things is if any draft class consists of an all-pro, it can't be an F. You can't if you have 10 picks and you have 9 busts and 1 all-pro, you at least get a D. An all-pro brings up a draft class grade one grade, because all-pros don't grow on trees. So what has to happen between Elijah McGuire, Jeremy Clark, Derek Jones to stop this draft from being a D or a D minus? What's got to happen in your mind with those 3 guys? How many guys have to make it? How big of a role do they have to play? What do you feel?
Yeah, I was trying to look it up, and my computer's doing whatever right now. Is Jeremy Clark on the IR? Has this guy ever been healthy? Because I think that would be the first.
He has. I want to say they added him to the active roster late in the year last season, but he didn't get on the field.
Okay.
Because I know he was practicing. I remember the reason I remember he was practicing was because, and again, I believe it was Manish Mehta who reported that that the Jets were working him at safety. And I kind of thought that made sense, because to me, he just didn't have the attributes you would expect of a corner. So when I saw that he was playing safety, I thought that made a little more sense. And actually, 6'3". Not a lot of 6'3" cornerbacks out there. And according to PFF, or PFR rather, Pro Football Reference, this says he played a game in 17 and a game in 18. That's probably on special teams. Yeah, but probably special teamer. But I think of the 3, he's the least likely to make the roster. But what are your thoughts on those 3 guys?
Yeah, I think that he probably, the safety room is still trying to sort itself out. We obviously know that there's two guys that we're pretty high on, which we already just spoke about from this draft class, and we're just not sure where guys like Middleton's going to be. And, Rontez Miles, we know that he's a good special teamer and everything like that, but we're just not sure in a coverage situation, because we did see Rontez out there last year for a little bit, and you could kind of see this guy belongs on special teams. But to keep the focus on Jeremy Clark, what I think is interesting is that he was kind of very, very similar to how we're going to be looking at Blesson Austin, is that he was just a guy that had some injury problems, but super athlete, has the measurables, looks to be, a versatile guy that can play corner or safety. He just has to get healthy and bite into his playbook and just reach for the stars. So I think what's interesting is that there was a guy, and I if my memory serves me right, you were a fan of Jordan Lewis going back through that process as one of the corners that the Jets should have targeted. Right?
He was my cornerback. I wanted it.
Yes.
That's why when I say corners, I didn't want to mention his name again because I talked about him so much that year, and I've mentioned him several. I thought the Jets should have tried to make a move for him this year. The Cowboys, for whatever
where
reason,
we would be.
The Cowboys were not playing that dude. I don't know why.
And he had a good rookie year too. I mean, they had a few injuries out there, and I think what they had to do once their defensive backs kind of went haywire, they moved Byron Jones. Sorry to pivot to the Dallas Cowboys, but they had to move Byron Jones back to corner because they were so, weak at the cornerback position, and he was playing safety for them. But anyway, I remember hearing that if Clark had stayed healthy that year, he would have been in the conversation as one of those like big oversized corners that, any team would want to work with a guy like that with his athleticism. And he just happens to be one of those players that McCagnon gambled on to see if I can get this guy healthy, there's upside. And that's pretty much all you could look at. And he's yet to do that. So, this is going to be the year where he's going to have to separate himself during, the next upcoming weeks as they, go into preseason. I agree with you. If one guy has to go out of those three, I could see it being Clark, because Derek Jones has been talked about more and more getting worked in with the ones and twos. And to go back to what you'd said about grading this draft class, and for it to have to be better than a D as a grading, you would have to have Derek Jones find himself get a significant role, either rotating on nickel or dime or quarter packages, or possibly beating out Darryl Roberts for the number 2 spot. That's how this draft class would be considered anything close to being successful. Now, obviously, we're happy with our 2 safeties in the first and second round, but in order for this class to be considered one of McCagnon's better drafts, Jones has to make it, and he has to play a significant role this year. And McGuire has to prove to Adam Gase that he belongs in this backfield and deserves to be a rotational guy. And he should have to fight and say, look, I want at least 100 carries this season. And if you look at that over, a handful of games, you're only talking about 5 or 6 touches a game. So he's got to fight to find those touches, and then you have to maximize each of those touches and produce. So nobody has, a harder, or no one's in a harder position and as far as the running backs are concerned than Elijah McGuire, because he's kind of the man in the middle. And you just kind of wonder, well, Ty Montgomery can do the things that you do. Bilal Powell can do the things that you do. And you're nowhere near as fast as Trenton Cannon. And we're not sure if you have any sort of role in as a special teamer. So guys like McGuire and Clark have to play their tail off this year in order to put their stamp in on this roster.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly where I am in terms of getting this a respectable grade. If Derek Jones becomes a number 2 corner and a solid number 2, number 1 would be fantastic, but let's reel it in a little bit and say Derek Jones becomes a quality number 2 corner, and Eli McGuire becomes a solid number 2 running back. Well, then you have an all-pro safety, a starting corner, another, a guy like Marcus May who does have Pro Bowl potential, and a quality running back who, as we said, can run, block, catch. Then I think this class starts creeping into the B range. 3 starters and all-pro. That's not bad. And all the misses are, just. You kind of wonder, Dylan Donahue might he have been a decent contributor if not for the DUIs. And Jordan Leggett, I'm curious. I mean, it doesn't matter to the Jets, of course, because he's not a Jet now. But I really was surprised they didn't keep him around to give him a shot in a new offense with a new, with a better head coach, basically. And just for the record, by the way, we mentioned Jordan Lewis played 746 snaps as a rookie. According to PFF, graded out as a 72, which is a solid grade there. And last year, he saw his snaps drop to 193. And they were not playing him at all early in the year. And his grade actually went up, graded out at 76.6. So he's been a really... I'm telling you, man, I wanted him in the draft, as you know. And then people got on me because I said during the season this past year when I kind of took a peek at him and I realized Dallas just wasn't playing him more than a handful of snaps a game. And I wrote an article saying, hey, this is a guy the Jets should go get now. You might be able to get him for a 4th or 5th rounder, and he's going to be a starting corner. And that didn't happen, obviously. And I would love for the Jets to go out and make that move. But that'll wrap things up. Unfortunately, I'll wait to hear back. Maybe we can reschedule this thing. Scott Carter was not able to call in. We apologize for that. But before we go, one last name I want to throw out there, Alex, because of the fact that it's come up a few times today because he sent out an interesting tweet that people thought might put him on the market. Jacksonville Jaguars cornerback Jalen Ramsey. I mentioned it the other day because I wrote an article talking about who the Jets might, what impact players could Joe Douglas pursue. And I listed a few corners, Chris Harris and Slay and one or two other guys. And I almost included Jalen Ramsey. The reason I didn't is because the number of times I've heard him quoted, it may have all come from the same interview, but he really trashed a lot of guys publicly, and I don't see that being something Adam Gase wants in his locker room. Do you think Adam Gase would take on a player like that? And if so, would you want to trade for a guy? And this is why he got in the news. I guess he tweeted out, I'm going to ask for so much money that they're going to have to put me on layaway. So do you want a guy who publicly trashes other players and openly says he's going to, I would imagine if he's making a comment like that, I imagine he's going to try to become the top paid corner in the NFL. And the compensation will not be light in a trade for a player of that caliber. So all of those things considered, can he play for Gase? He wants a ton of money. You're going to have to give up a premium pick possibly to get him. Is that something would you want that? And do you think it's something the Jets will pursue?
Yeah, I love the skill set. I think he's a phenomenal football player. He's definitely one of those guys that you can trust and just tell him, okay, your duties are to cover the number one wide receiver today. Wherever he goes, you go. If he goes to the bathroom, I want you outside the stall. But what comes with that? Things that you just mentioned. Ego, the mouth, a giant paycheck. These are all things that maybe the Jets, could use on their defense, because why wouldn't you want a top corner to be a part of your defense? Everyone would. But I'm just not sure if the baggage that comes with it would validate a premium pick in a trade and then having to rework a deal that could be astronomical, because if the highest paid corner is $17 million or in that range, which we already have on our salary right now with Tremaine Johnson, and you're telling me that Ramsey's better than him, what is he going to ask for? That scares me a little bit. I know that he's still young. I know that he's still got a lot of good football years ahead of him, but it just concerns me that you have a player like that clearly is more about getting paid at this point in time than trying to win Super Bowls, because this was a team that was knocking on the Super Bowl door in the AFC Championship 2 years ago and then was laughed at last season. And a guy like him who has a mouth and is outspoken kind of can be a little bit of a distraction and not always the best guy to have as far as a chemistry aspect is concerned in the locker room. If things go south, he's going to let you know. And we know how the media is in New York, and we know how stories can spin, and they take a fragment of what a player says and they turn it into this mountain of a quote-unquote issue. So, yes, I love his skill set. I'm not sure if I would be willing to, take on all that baggage that could be with a guy like Ramsey.
Yeah, you make some really good points. And I think, the thing that kind of that I thought back to was how we've talked about how Adam Gase let guys go who did a lot of talking. And, he let Jarvis Landry go. He let go of Ajayi, which, that was related more to him supposedly having some issues with doing what he was supposed to do on the field. But Gase doesn't strike me as a guy who would want that on his team or in his locker room. So when I sat down and kind of looked through some rosters and what players might be available, it struck me that we've heard a few times that that's a name that could be on the trade block. And I just don't know that would happen. But we've actually, while we've been wrapping up covering these last few topics, we've gotten back online with Gators writer Scott Carter, and he's actually going to be joining us now as planned. So better late than never. That was a little miscommunication on my part. I think I gave Scott the impression we would be calling into him. Scott, are you with us?
Hey, Glenn, I'm here, man. Finally glad to hook up here.
Yeah. Thanks so much for calling in. We really appreciate it. Few minutes of your time to talk about a guy who, all Jets fans are really enamored by, intrigued by, in Jachai Polite, a guy who fell to round 3 in this past draft. And why don't you give us a little background on yourself? First. Let us know how long you've been covering the Gators and how'd you end up there.
Well, I'm a newspaper guy. A long time worked at the Tampa Tribune, and I changed to this role it's been about 9 years ago. So it's been a while, but still around the sports and covering the Gators, and it's been a dry spell until the last couple of years. And obviously, Jachai Polite was a big part of the turnaround last year, under Dan Mullen in his first year. So Jets, got an intriguing player, as you said.
And while we're on the conversation of Gators here, Scott, I wanted to ask you, before we go into the new rookie that everyone's wondering about, there's a couple other Gators that are on the Jets team, and Marcus May and Brian Poole. What did you see from them when they were together? And is there anything that you can talk about with May's injury history? Because that's always a topic of conversation when he comes up.
Yeah, I mean, both of those guys at Florida, they were kind of development players under Will Muschamp. I think they both actually came in when Dan Quinn was defensive coordinator and Will Muschamp was head coach. And obviously Quinn took the Falcons job and then left to go back to Seattle, then took the Falcons job. And Marcus and Brian Poole both kind of just kept getting better. They weren't as highly, I guess, recruited as guys like Vernon Hargraves III, who's played at Florida, Matt Elam, Keanu Neal, some of the names you probably heard, but they really turned into good college players. And then in Marcus's case, I do remember him having a shoulder injury that cost him some games. I think his junior year, had a really a good senior year, if I recall correctly. And I didn't know that he was going to be a first-round draft pick, quite frankly, but he was, and he played his way into that. And I know you guys they picked up Brian Poole from Atlanta, who really blossomed as an undrafted free agent there under Quinn. Again, I think both of those guys, in my view, probably have exceeded expectations just from when they entered, UF, because they were not, like I said, not as highly touted guys as some of their teammates, and yet they've carved out a pretty good career so far in the NFL. I don't, in terms of Marcus, I don't know these guys move on, so sometimes I don't get to follow him as closely as I like. In the case of Marcus, I'm not for sure. Is he hurt again, or has he had a recent injury?
Yeah, he's been dealing with a few issues. I think he hurt his ankle at the end of his rookie season, which he needed to get a slight procedure on. And then last year, after he got cleared, he did something with his shoulder that I also believe needed some cleanup work as well. So unfortunately, This guy seems to keep finding himself on the operating table.
Yeah, I mean, he was a very physical player at UF, and as I said, I know he had a shoulder issue one of his seasons there. It cost him some time, and then he got healthy and stated his case to get into the league. But as you guys know, it's once you get there, I mean, you do have to stay healthy, or you're going to lose your spot on the roster pretty fast.
Yeah, I think that was probably one of the frustrating things for Jets fans, was that he played 16 games as a rookie, he stayed healthy, played really well. And so he's kind of a big X factor this year. If he's healthy, that secondary would be much better off with him. But moving on to Jachai Polite, we'll get a little bit more specific in a bit, but just as an overall, an overview, what are your thoughts of him as a player from what you were able to see up close, more so on the field than off the field, Jachai Polite?
Yeah, I mean, he was a guy that, when he came in to Florida, obviously a good recruit, but the first year he was there, you could just tell he was out of shape. And then big storyline going to his sophomore year, if camp starts, and he noticeably looks physically different. And I remember the story back then was he basically said, look, I got to eat better. I stopped eating junk food. I think he was a big candy guy, if I recall correctly. So he stopped eating some bad stuff, and, he looked better physically. Still didn't, make a huge impact as a sophomore, but then you guys saw what happened his junior year, and I can't say that I saw, 11.5 sacks and really a huge game changer for Florida last year. I thought he was going to get a lot more opportunities, but I thought that C.C. Jefferson was going to be their premier edge rusher, and he basically made C.C. an afterthought with the way he played, broke out up at Tennessee, and he just, he kept getting better and better, and, before you know it, late in the year, there's talk about him being a first-round pick. I know the mock drafts were all over for a while until the combine, but I just saw a player who really got a lot better. And, I think the playing for Todd Grantham, I think the system really fit him well. Todd Grantham, the defensive coordinator, he was in his first year last year. He liked him right away as far as the physical gifts, and he put him in the right position. And I think that's what made all the difference for Jachai, because, he was able to utilize some of his physical gifts in that system that we really hadn't seen beforehand, because he's not a guy who played in the interior line. I don't think he's big enough for that. But if you put him in the right spot and let him run free out on the edge, he's an impressive player. If he's in shape, and which unfortunately he wasn't, I don't think, at the combine, and that cost him a lot of money.
And speaking of that, Jachai Polite definitely did not have the smoothest combine or pro day. and a lot of conversation was his maturity. Now, I've seen different takes, and I've read about different things about him being a bit of a character in the sense that sometimes he can be a little bit of a goofball. Is that the right way to describe him? What did you see from a maturity aspect with him, and can he clean that up moving forward?
Yeah, I think he can. I do think Jachai, when he got to Florida, I think like a lot of these guys, he's been coddled or always has been the star. And then he gets to a program like Florida, and suddenly he's just one of the guys. And I think that did take him a while to, get into, a maturity level. He had to reach a maturity level to succeed. And I think he got there. But I still think, Jachai, I remember after Pro Day, I was walking with him back after this big interview he did was the first time he spoke since his combine interview, which didn't go exactly well. And we were just talking, and he said, man, it was just so much that he didn't know about. And, he even admitted, I thought he handled that day well with the media in terms of saying what he should have said, saying the right things, but he did kind of confess that he wasn't prepared. I don't think he took it as seriously as he should have. And, people around Florida after the bowl win, I think some eyebrows are raised because he kind of disappeared for those months between, January and February until the combine. We really didn't see him. And obviously the coaches and the strength staff, they love when those guys stay around so they can kind of see how they're doing. And they have a lot of resources there they can help them with. But Jachai kind of went off on his own. And I think that obviously hurt him in some ways. But I do believe, you got to think that the last 6 months, these experiences, you hope that, he's matured even some that maybe he wasn't prepared for as he entered that process. I don't think there was ever any real red flags about, off the field behavior or anything like that. I just think it's a guy comes from a pretty, tough background, you could say, underprivileged background. Didn't have a real father figure. I think his mom's brothers were kind of his mentors growing up. So, he's just still trying to find his way. And I know New York's a tough place to find your way in the NFL, but I do think there are some gifts there if he's in the right system and around the right people. I do think he can be a good player.
And now I was gonna touch base and ask what you thought the preseason buzz was on him, but you did touch on that earlier, so I appreciate that. But we'll go one more question each here, and thanks again for joining us, Scott Carter, who covers the Florida Gators, joining us now. So Scott, in terms of Jachai Polite's overall skill set, the Jets will probably ask him to do a lot of things because Greg Williams kind of just likes to do that. He likes having a lot of moving pieces. But in terms of playing with his hand in the dirt versus playing standing up, was there a noticeable difference from one to the other in the level of play?
I think he's at his best standing up from what we saw at Florida. That was just, what they asked him to do. His strength, as most of these guys who are known as, edge rushers. I mean, he's got a great burst off the line. The speed and quickness allows him to get, a jump on these bigger offensive linemen. I don't think we saw a lot of him in coverage, dropping back, which he may be asked to do more of in the NFL. I don't know. I don't really have a good feel for that part of the game with him. I think he's a good enough athlete, certainly, to do it. But I don't know how much knowledge or how much details he has in, defending passes. I think that's something that, we're all going to have to find out. But I think his strength right now, just from what we saw, was the ability to, come off that standing up as an edge rusher and making plays. And, so many of his plays were, timely for Florida, forced 6 fumbles. And, I mean, it was just, like I said earlier, it was just he made a huge difference, more, I think, than anybody could have really predicted, this past season. And now it's a whole new challenge for him.
Okay, so a lot of difficulties that young players have is being able to take that next step. And like you had just mentioned before about how the system in which he was able to thrive in there. do you think that he'll be a quick study, or is it going to be a situation where it may take him, maybe 2 years before you start to see some of the things that he was doing in his final year in Florida? How quickly can you speak of his development?
Yeah. Well, I think one advantage that he has, Todd Grantham, who came in last year and changed up the system more to 3-4, moved Jachai into that role. And Todd Grantham, if you know his background, this is a guy whose career is split half between the NFL, half between college. He's been an NFL defensive coordinator. So his defense, has a lot of NFL, terminology or thinking in it. So, I think that's got to help Jachai, and he performed well in his only year in that defense of Florida. Obviously, he's going to face a whole different beast in NFL offensive linemen. But the SEC, the offensive linemen there are some of the best in the country. A lot of those guys get drafted. So I think he has all the tools to, be a really good player and to be the kind of player the Jets envision. I think if he does develop and stays healthy, it won't surprise me in 2 or 3 years if we look back at him as, possibly being the steal of this draft. I think he has that potential, but then on the flip side, if you're a Jets fan, I'm sure you're wondering, well, why did he drop? Is this guy, is he already dropping down to where he's ever going to fill the bill? I just think that had to motivate him, and just the impression I got from, what he said at Pro Day, what I've read about since he's been up there. I think he's matured and realizing now that, this isn't maybe going to be as smooth as it was his last year at Florida, but at the same time, I think he's got some, great experience in playing for Todd Grantham that should help him.
All right, well, that was Scott Carter. Scott, you want to go ahead and give out your Twitter handle, and just want to say thanks again so much for joining us.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me on, and it's just Gators Scott. If you're a Gators fan out there in Jetland, feel free to follow.
Thanks a lot, Scott. We appreciate your time.
All right, take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Take care. All right, so that was Gators beat writer Scott Carter giving us a little bit of insight on not just Jachai Polite, but Brian Poole and Marcus May. We thank him for joining us. And perfect timing, because we were just about to wrap up, a couple minutes left. Alex, go ahead and give out the Twitter handle.
Yes, Jets fans, you can find me at NYJetsLife24. That's at NYJetsLife24.
All right, Jets fans, thanks so much for joining us. OTAs, and, there's another week of mini camp, so we'll have some more stuff to cover next week. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a great week.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to follow Glenn on Twitter at AceFan23, and the show can be found at JetNation Radio. Until next time, go Jets!